In this particular class, I shall be covering the chapter 8 of the economic survey, which deals with employment, skill development, and labor welfare. And like I've said you in the previous classes, when I'm discussing the economic survey, the relevant portion of the budget I have integrated into my discussion of economic survey as well. So let me just show you as to which all topics shall be covered in today's class. These are the topics which shall be covered in today's class. You can just see. First, we'll cover the basics related to employment, that is, important terms related to employment, current employment scenario in India, impact of COVID-19 on the labor market, wherein I shall be discussing the important aspects of ILO's report on employment, jobless growth of the Indian economy, government initiatives to boost job creation and labor welfare, employment linked incentive scheme which has been announced in this year's budget, food processing industries, care economy, skilling India, and important budget initiatives for skilling India. And the last topic will be the topic related to apprenticeship, that is internship. So let's start with the analysis of the chapter of employment as well as labor welfare. Okay. See, we all know that UPSC examination is quite unpredictable, but at the same time, we must understand that to make the UPSC exam little more predictable, we need to have a detailed analysis of the previous year questions. If you analyze the previous year questions, you'll get to know as to which all questions have been asked, from where the questions have been asked, and more importantly, why the questions have been asked. Based upon such a detailed analysis, you can then guess as to which topics becomes important for the next year prelims or the mains examination. So let's first carry out that analysis of PYQs from the chapter of employment and skill development. Okay, you can see in prelims 2024, there was a question related to Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Mandan. Then in 2022, there was a question on a report which is published by Labor Bureau. The report is Industrial Disputes, Closure, Retrenchments and Layoffs. In 2021, there was a question related to casual workers employed in India. In 2019, there was a question related to industrial employment standing orders, which was issued in the year 2018. So as you can see, this order was issued in 2018 and the question was asked in 2019, which means it was a current affairs related question. Then you can see in 2018, we had a question related to Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. Then 2017, a question on National Skill Qualification Framework. In 2017, a question on NPS, National Pension System. 2016, a question on Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana. Once again, 16, a question on Stand Up India scheme. 2016, once again, in the same year, 2016, 3 questions. The third question was related to Atal Pension Yojana. And lastly, 2013, a question related to demographic dividend. So I have shown you questions which have appeared in prelims in the last 10 years, right from 2013 to 2024. Based upon the analysis of these previous year questions, what can we understand? See, we can understand that generally questions in prelims have been asked with respect to important initiatives of the government with respect to employment, labor welfare, skill development, as well as some important reports which captures the level of employment in India. For example, with respect to employment, we saw that there was a question related to Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana as well as Stand Up India scheme. With respect to labor welfare, we had a question related to Atal Pension Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Mandhan, as well as NPS, new pension, national pension system. On skill development, we had a question related to Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana and National Skill Qualification Framework. And there was one report related to the report published by Labor Bureau, right? So this is where the questions have been asked. So what kind of questions you can expect in the upcoming prelims? See, with respect to employment, Government of India has launched a new initiative called as Employment Linked Incentive Scheme in this year's budget. So obviously this scheme becomes important from the perspective of your prelims as well as the mains examination. With respect to labor welfare, I'm pretty sure most of you must be knowing that for the welfare of the government employees, the government is implementing new pension scheme, right? So just 2 weeks back, the government of India has come up with a new pension scheme for the government employees, which is called as Unified Pension Scheme. So just like how a question has been asked with respect to new pension scheme, a question can also be expected with respect to Unified Pension Scheme. With respect to skill development, you need to know from the perspective of the mains examination, what all initiatives the government has taken to promote skill development, then challenges of skill development, what we should do to promote skill development, and some important reports related to employment, one of which is PLFS, that is Periodic Labor Force Survey Report. So this is what we can learn as far as our prelims is concerned. Same way, let's have a look at the questions which have been asked in the mains examination. Okay, please have a look at this question which was asked in mains 2023. The question was, what is care economy? How is care economy different from monetized economy? Which is once again related to employment. After that, you can see repeatedly questions have been asked with respect to various aspects of employment. But let me tell you one interesting thing. The interesting thing here is, if you look at all of these questions focus on one important aspect related to employment. That is, it focuses on the aspect of jobless growth of the Indian economy. All of these questions, barring the first question, to a certain extent, it is talking about jobless growth, but it is not using that word directly. For example, look at the question asked in mains 2023. Most of the unemployment in India is structural in nature. Structural unemployment is once again related to the jobless growth. Economic growth in the recent past has been led by increase in labor productivity, which is once again related to jobless growth. So repeatedly, questions have been asked with respect to jobless growth. So from the perspective of mains, what you need to know is, why is India facing jobless growth? What initiatives has the government taken to promote creation of jobs, and what more needs to be done. With respect to what more needs to be done, you know, all these years, let me tell you, economic survey repeatedly used to emphasize on focusing on textile and leather industries. Textile and leather because they are more labor intensive industries. But then I used to wonder as to why should India focus on textile industries and leather industries, particularly when other economies such as say Bangladesh, Vietnam, they are more competitive in terms of, let's say, textile and leather. It is very difficult for India to compete with these economies in terms of textile and leather. And moreover, you must understand that these industries, that is textile and leather, they're already matured industries. So I used to wonder why should India focus on those industries which is already matured? Why should India not focus on sunrise sectors? As the name suggests, sunrise sectors means sectors which are fast growing. Fortunately, this year's economic survey has in a way changed its stance. It no longer talks about leather and textile, rather it talks about care economy and food processing industries, which it believes are the sunrise sectors of the Indian economy to create jobs. So you can expect question on food processing industries as well as care economy in the mains examination. Hope it is clear to everyone. So now let's start our discussion with respect to this particular chapter, where we'll first focus on the basics related to employment. See, in any economy, we consider a particular person to be employed provided a person is involved in some kind of economic activity. So question is, what constitutes economic activity in a particular economy? Number one, if a person is doing any kind of job, any kind of work for which the person is getting paid, that person will be considered to be involved in some kind of economic activity. Example being a farmer, a worker in manufacturing industry, a construction labor, a fruit vendor, tea vendor, people who are working in hotels and restaurants. All these people, they're getting paid for the job which they are doing, right? So obviously they are involved in economic activities. Apart from that, there might be certain people who are doing some kind of work, but for that work, they're not getting paid. In spite of these people not getting paid, we still consider these people to be involved in some kind of economic activity. So what is that kind of unpaid work which is constitutes economic activity? You can see production of goods for own consumption. I'm a farmer. I'm producing certain agricultural crops as part of subsistence agriculture. Those crops, I'm not selling it to the market, but I'm consuming it for myself. It is still considered as an economic activity. Second, I might be involved in construction of my own house. Construction labor is rendering his services, is getting paid for that particular job. I am constructing my own house. I'm not getting paid for it, but still it constitutes economic activity. Third, unpaid helper in the household enterprises. So the word which is important is unpaid helper in the household enterprises. You know, there are a lot of household enterprises in India. Take for example, in Shivakasi in Tamil Nadu, you have household enterprises involved in manufacturing of crackers. A household enterprise in Kolhapur district of Maharashtra might be involved in producing of Kolhapuri chappals. A household enterprise in Agra may be involved in producing of Agra Petha. All of these are household enterprises. If I am running this household enterprise, obviously I will be considered to be part of this paid economy. But let's say someone is helping me in running this household enterprise. For these people, I'm not be paying any kind of money, but still these people who are not getting paid for the job, they are still considered to be involved in some kind of economic activity. There's just one exception. As you can see, homemakers. When homemakers are involved in household duties, that is care economy, that does not constitute economic activity in a economy. Now, in what way questions can be asked? There could be a question which I'll show you later. Which among the following activities constitute economic activity in a particular country? You might get 3 to 4 options and you need to choose which activity constitutes economic activity. I hope this part is clear about economic activity. The next one is important terms related to employment. So let's look at the first term, that is labor force. In any economy, you'll come across 3 set of people. First category, people who are working. Second category, people who are looking out for work, but they're not being able to get jobs. Third category includes the people who might not even be searching for work. As far as the third category is concerned, it might include children, adults who are pursuing higher education, or probably people like you who are preparing for competitive exams like UPSC because you're not searching for job right now, or the homemakers, right? 3 categories. When we say labor force of a particular country, labor force include all those people who are either working or looking out for work. That is what is labor force. So people who are presently employed are searching for jobs. That constitutes the labor force. Workforce include all those people who are presently employed. So think, if I want to know how many people in a particular country are actually unemployed, I can easily calculate it by labor force minus workforce, right? So a person is considered to be unemployed only when a person is searching for a job and does not get a job. If a person is not even wanting to work, we would not even consider such person to be unemployed, right? Labor force participation rate tells us what percentage of the working age population is part of labor force. That is, what percentage of working age population is working or looking out for work. So you can see the formula is labor force divided by working age population into 100. Next is worker population ratio, which tells us what percentage of population in a country is actually employed, working. So can you find the difference here? In denominator for LFPR, you have percentage of its working age population, whereas the denominator in worker population ratio is the total population. The numerator here is labor force and the numerator here is workforce. And the last and most important term is unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is actually defined as percentage of labor force who fail to get jobs. So in a way, the unemployment rate in a particular country can be calculated as labor force minus workforce. Labor force minus workforce is the number of unemployed people divided by labor force, which means we are trying to find out what percentage of labor force is unable to get jobs. That is how you calculate unemployment rate in a country. Next is categories of workers based upon employment status. Based upon the employment status, workers in India are categorized into three types. One is self-employed workers. Second one is regular wage or salaried workers. And third one is a casual workers. Let's understand the difference between these three categories. You can see self-employed people includes those people who are own account workers. What do you mean by own account workers? You know, a lot of people are self-employed and they are running their small businesses, right? So such people, we call them as own account workers. For example, it might include people who are selling fruits, vegetables. They are involved in some kind of roadside eateries, restaurants. So we call them as own account workers. And employers. Some people might also be running their small businesses also, and they might be employing someone, right? Second one is unpaid helper in the household enterprise. We include them in the self-employed category. The second one is regular wage or salaried workers, which, as the name suggests, these are the people who are receiving wages or income on a regular basis. Such people, we call them as regular wage or salaried workers. Third category is casual labor. See, the difference between regular wage and casual labor is regular wage workers, they get wages on a regular basis, let's say on a monthly basis. Casual workers do not get wages or income on a regular basis. Example of which would include the people employed in MG agriculture workers, and construction laborers. We can call them as casual laborers. So that is how you have three categories of workers in India. In what way question can be asked? You can expect a question with respect to which category accounts for the highest share, which category accounts for the lowest share, the trends that becomes important for your prelims. That we'll discuss later after understanding the basics. Next one is approaches to measure employment. Now this is something which is interesting, and let me tell you, this concept has already been asked in the UPSC Mains 2023. So what is this approach? National Statistical Office, NSO, measures how many people are employed or unemployed in a particular country. To know this, NSO carries out a survey. In this survey, NSO goes to the people and asks people certain questions. Based upon the responses which NSO gets from the people, NSO will categorize the people as employed or unemployed. For carrying out this survey, there are three approaches which NSO follows, and this is actually important. Let's look at the three approaches one by one, starting with usual status approach. Let's say I am NSO and you all are people. So I will come to you, I'll ask you certain questions. One of which would be, prior to 1 year of this particular survey, that is 365 days before this particular survey, were you employed for majority of the year? When I say majority of the year, think of it, majority of the year means more than half of the year. 365 days, you do half of 365 days, 182. So if someone is employed for 183 days or more in the preceding 1 year, if they say yes, then we'll consider those people as employed. If someone says no, I was not employed for majority of the last 365 days, such a person will be considered as unemployed. This approach to measure employment, we call it as usual status approach. The next one is current weekly status. What is this current weekly status? Once again, I'm NSO. I'll come to you and I'll ask you a question. The question in this particular case here is, in the last 1 week, did you find job for at least 1 hour in any of those 7 days? I repeat, in the last 1 week, did you find job for at least 1 hour in any of those 7 days? If your response is yes, employed. If your response is no, unemployed. So at least for 1 hour in those 7 days, you should have got a job. Only then we'll consider such a person to be employed. That is current weekly status. The next one is current daily status. There is little confusion between the two, so please pay attention. In current daily status, the question which NSO would ask here is, in last 1 week, for each of those 7 days, did you find job for at least 1 hour? Can you see what's the difference here? The question in this particular case is, in last 7 days, did you find job for at least 1 hour on any of those 7 days? But here the question is, in last 7 days, did you find job for at least 1 hour on each of the 7 days? That is the difference. So in India, we use all of these 3 approaches. So when NSO measures employment, it uses all of these 3 approaches. But can you tell me, as to among these 3 approaches, which approach is a default approach for India? By default, when we say that labor force participation rate is so and so, unemployment rate is so and so, which approach do we refer to? Are we referring to usual status, current weekly status, or current daily status? क्या लगता है आपको? Yes. Anyone? What do you think is a default approach? Current weekly? Current, okay. The default approach in India is always the usual status approach. This is the default approach in India. Please remember that. Okay? So having discussed the basics related to employment, let's look at the employment trends in India. Okay, there's this one about reports, then we'll look at the employment trends. To measure the level of employment and unemployment, there are 3 reports in India. First one is payroll reporting, quarterly employment survey, and periodic labor force survey. Okay, please pay attention. The workers in India are categorized into 2 types: formal workers and informal workers. When I say formal workers are those people who have job security. Job security means they are permanent employees. They have income security. Income security means they are regularly getting wages. And more importantly, they have access to social security benefits. Social security benefits such as employee provident fund and employee pension scheme. So such workers, we call them as formal workers. In the context of Indian economy, only 10% of workers are formal. 90% of workers are actually informal, which means they do not have job security, income security, or social security benefits. We call them as informal workers. So we have a report called as payroll reporting, which is published by National Statistical Office, and it measures employment only in the formal sector. It does not measure employment in the informal sector. So how does it measure the employment in the formal sector? I told you, when you become a formal worker, right, you get enrolled in Employee Provident Fund and Employee Pension Scheme. So what NSO does, in a year, it will see how many people are enrolled in Employee Provident Fund and Employee Pension Scheme. Based upon that, it will come out with the statistics that this is the extent of employment creation in the formal sector. So that is payroll reporting. Now, can I say that one of the fundamental flaw of payroll reporting is that it does not measure employment of the informal workers, in particular when informal workers constitute 90% of the workers, right? For that, we have this PLFS. We'll come to that. Next report is Quarterly Employment Survey Report. This report is published by Labor Bureau. It will take into account formal workers plus informal workers. So in a way, it is better than payroll reporting because it is capturing the employment in the informal. But the problem with quarterly employment survey is that it measures employment in only certain selected sectors of the economy. It does not cover all the sectors, which means this particular report is limited in scope simply because it covers employment in only certain selected sectors. That is why the most comprehensive and the most important report capturing employment is PLFS, Periodic Labor Force Survey Report, which, as you can see, it is published by NSO, same as payroll reporting. Let me tell you a brief background about PLFS. Before PLFS report, we used to publish report called as Employment and Unemployment Survey Report. The problem with this particular report was that this report was published at a frequency of 5 years. See, if I am a policy maker, I would need the data related to employment and unemployment at a much faster frequency, like quarterly or yearly. Because as a policy maker, I would want to know how many jobs we have created, how many people are unemployed. Based upon that, we can take corrective actions. But this report used to give us data at a frequency of 5 years. That is why, in order to improve the frequency at which we are publishing the labor survey reports, we replaced this report with PLFS. And as you can see, the PLFS captures employment and unemployment in the urban areas on a quarterly basis, which means in 1 year, you'll have 4 reports, which is better as compared to earlier. Same way, it captures employment in the rural areas on an annual basis, 1 year. So please remember the frequency for urban areas and rural areas. Keeping this in mind, let's go to the next part. Next part is about the current employment scenario from the economic survey. Let's first focus on LFPR, Labor Force Participation Rate, which I told you tells us what is the percentage of working age population which is part of labor force. As you can see, in last 5 years, labor force participation rate has increased from 50% to 58%, which is good because more number of people are actually now either working or willing to work. Apart from that, the female labor force participation rate has also increased from 32 to 37% in the same period. So not only the overall LFPR has increased, even the female LFPR has also got increased. But the biggest problem that we have in LFPR is a gender disparity. That is the difference between male and female labor force participation rate, wherein male labor force participation rate is almost 78%, which means 78% of working age males are either employed or looking out for work, whereas female labor force participation rate is 37%. So can you see a wide gap between these two, right? Why is it a constraint? Just like how we say demographic dividend, we have what is called as gender dividend. Please look at the word. You need to use such kind of words in the mains. Gender dividend. Don't you think that we are not being able to capitalize on this gender dividend because of low labor force participation rate, right? Same way, you can see worker population ratio has also got increased. As far as unemployment rate is concerned, unemployment rate has got reduced from 6% to 3.2%. Why this unemployment rate has got reduced? This is something which I shall be covering in the next part. Need not worry. So you can see here important trends which become important as far as your prelims examination is concerned. And you can also use these facts and figures as fodder points to substantiate your answer in the mains examination. Let's look at the next one. That is sector wise contribution to employment. Okay. Predominantly in India, according to the NSO, we have three sectors. One is agriculture, other one is industry, and the third one is the services sector. So let's look at the contribution of each of these sectors. Agriculture sector, as you can see, it contributes just 18% to our GDP. In spite of that, it is accounting for 45% of our workforce. That is why we say that there is high level of disguised unemployment in the agriculture sector. Industry. Okay. Do not confuse industry with manufacturing. When we say industry, industry includes manufacturing, mining, construction, electricity, gas and water distribution, as well as construction. If you add all of these sectors, the total employment is around 25%. In particular, if you look at the share of manufacturing sector to our GDP, it is around 14 to 17%. In terms of jobs, it is around 12%. And let me tell you, this contribution of manufacturing sector to our GDP and employment, this has remained stagnant. Since when? Since 1991. So that is the most important trend which you need to know with respect to manufacturing. When it comes to services, services account for 55% of our GDP. Yet, look at the employment, just 30%. So it is employing quite less. Out of these three sectors, the sector which has a capacity to create more jobs is a manufacturing sector, right? And the manufacturing sector has failed to grow, and that is one of the reasons why we are facing jobless growth. This is as far as sector-wise contribution. Let's look at sub-sector-wise contribution. Please concentrate here. Can you see? Agriculture accounts for the highest share, and that is followed by construction. Earlier, what used to happen? Manufacturing used to contribute for the second largest share. followed by construction. Now, construction has overtaken the manufacturing. The reason being, you must be knowing, as part of Amrit Kal, government is focusing a lot on creation of infrastructure. That is why we are able to create number of jobs in the infrastructure or the construction industry. So please remember the trend. Agriculture account for the highest share, followed by the construction. Earlier, manufacturing accounted for the second largest share, but now construction has overtaken the manufacturing. With respect to female employment, please concentrate here. Female employment. Can you see 64% of females are actually employed in agriculture? Why? Why the proportion of females in agriculture has increased? The reason being, most of the males in the rural areas, they are migrating to urban areas in search of employment. This has in turn forced the women to take up agriculture. This phenomena, we call it as feminization of agriculture. So we are witnessing a greater feminization of agriculture where more women are taking up agriculture related activities. So you can see 64% of females are employed in agriculture, followed by manufacturing. Next trend is with respect to category wise employment. If you see category wise employment, I told you there are three categories of workers: self-employed, regular wage, and casual workers. Among these three categories, the highest proportion of workers are actually self-employed workers. This is followed by casual labor, and third one is the regular wage or salary. This is the first thing. Second thing, please observe the trend as to what has happened to the proportion of each of these three category of workers in the last 5 years. The proportion of self-employed people has increased, and this increase in the proportion of self-employed people is accompanied by decrease in regular wage workers as well as casual workers. Just remember the trend. That is more than sufficient. There's no need for you to remember the actual data. So you can just remember this thing. That is more than sufficient. So let's now take up some practice questions. Please look at practice MCQ number 1. Which among the following can be considered as economic activities in an economy? Please respond in the chat box. What do you think is an economic activity? Farmers producing crops for self-consumption, person constructing his own house, unpaid women helpers in household enterprises, household work done by women. So the answer is this is correct, as well as this is correct. This does not constitute economic activity, right? Good. So right answer is 1, 2, and 3. Let's look at the next question. Practice MCQ number 2. Consider the following statements related to labor force participation rate. LFPR refers to total percentage of working age population which is presently employed. LFPR of males is higher than females. LFPR of rural females is higher than LFPR of urban females. What do you think? Practice MCQ number 2. Good, Sakshi. Okay. If you read the practice MCQ number 2, the first statement is actually incorrect. Why is it incorrect? Is because LFPR refers to total percentage of working age population which is presently employed and searching for work. That is why the first statement is incorrect. The second statement is correct. What about the third statement? See, if you see female labor force participation rate, especially in a country like India. It might vary in other countries, but in case of India, it is actually inversely proportional to the income level of the households, which means if income level of households is less, this will force the women to work so that they can supplement the family income. So if income level is less, female labor force participation rate would increase. On the other hand, if income level is higher, if family's income level is higher, you know what happens then? Family will turn more patriarchal in that particular case. They will not allow the women to work. In that case, if the income level increases, economy is not important. What becomes important is patriarchy. That time, as the income increases, female labor force participation rate reduces. So it all depends upon the income level. If you compare rural areas and urban areas, in rural areas, income is less. So female labor force participation rate in rural areas will be higher as compared to the female labor force participation rate in the urban areas. So right answer is 2 and 3 only. Next question. Which among the following labor survey reports are published by NSO? I think it is pretty easy. Periodic labor force survey report as well as payroll reporting report. As far as this report is concerned, this report is published by Labor Bureau. So right answer 1 and 2. Look at the next question. What do you think is the answer? Practice MCQ number 4. PLFS. PLFS report captures employment only in the formal sector. It measures employment using all the 3 approaches. It captures employment at quarterly and yearly basis in urban and rural areas respectively. Yes, what do you think? 4 is C. Okay. Obviously, first is incorrect because it measures employment in formal and informal. PLFS report actually uses all the 3 approaches. Please understand, it uses all the 3 approaches, but the default approach is the usual status. It measures employment using all the 3 approaches. So that is why it is correct. PLFS report captures employment on a quarterly and yearly basis in urban and rural areas respectively. It is correct. So right answer is B, not C. 2 and 3 only. Last question. Consider the following statements related to employment scenario in India. The share of employment in agriculture has declined in the last decade. Yes, it has declined from 60% to 45%. This is correct. The construction sector accounts for the second largest share of employment after agriculture. Correct. More than 60% of females are employed in agriculture. This is also correct. Casual labor accounts for the largest category of workers. No, it is not casual workers. It is the self-employed workers. So the answer in this case is 1, 2 and 3. Okay, next let's move to the impact of COVID-19 on employment. Okay, let's understand this. Most of you must have heard of an international organization called as International Labour Organization. ILO has published a report called as India Employment Report 2024. In this report, ILO has highlighted that COVID-19 has acted as a major watershed in India's employment history in the 21st century. What do you mean by watershed? See, when we say a particular event as watershed, right? The situation before and the situation after and situation before, they are completely different. In a way, what ILO is highlighting is that the employment scenario after COVID-19 and the employment scenario prior to COVID-19, they are completely different. Second, it goes on to highlight that whatever limited progress, achievements that we were able to achieve in our employment prior to COVID, that achievement and progress has been lost because of COVID-19. That is why it says COVID-19 is a major watershed. So, for those of you who are writing mains, either this year or next year, what becomes important is what is the effect of COVID-19 on India's labor market as highlighted by ILO. So let's try to understand here and look at the practice question. Provide an overview of employment trends and patterns in India's labor market and how COVID-19 has exacerbated the labor market challenges. This is what we are going to cover. सबसे पहले we look at the employment trend and scenario, which I have already shown you, but there are some other important trends which we will discuss, and then we will understand the impact of COVID-19 on labor market. So please have a look at these points. We have covered this sectoral share of employment. We have covered LFPR. We have covered unemployment rate. Now look at the next two things. You all know that Indian economy is facing demographic dividend, right? So to reap this demographic dividend, we need to create large number of jobs. So quantity of jobs should increase. It being said, apart from focusing on quantity of jobs, India should also focus on quality of jobs. That is, the jobs that we are creating, they should not be informal jobs. They should be high paying, high productivity, formal sector jobs. Look at the word, high paying, high productivity, formal sector jobs, which means the quality of jobs should also equally be good. What is India's progress with respect to quantity and quality of jobs? Let's see this. With respect to quantity of jobs, economic survey this year has highlighted that every year we need to create 20 million jobs. But right now we are creating just 4 million jobs, which shows the extent of gap between what we need and what we are doing. Secondly, the employment elasticity in India is just 0.1, which means if our GDP increases by 1%, the employment in India is increasing by just 0.1%. Ideally, what should happen? 1% increase in GDP should lead to at least 1% increase in employment, but employment is increasing by just 0.1. Employment elasticity is 0.1. So we are not being able to create enough number of jobs. What about quality of jobs? Let's see this. You can see in agriculture, like I said, we are facing high level of disguised unemployment. Agriculture is contributing just 18% to our GDP, yet it employs 45% of our workforce. So obviously the people who are involved in agriculture, they're getting low income. The productivity is quite less, right? Dominance of informal workers. I told you 90% of workers in India are informal and only 10% are formal workers. Growing informalization of organized sector. See, within the organized sector, that is companies, you can come across both formal workers and informal workers. Formal workers, like I said, these are permanent employees who get regular wages and they are entitled to social security benefits. Informal workers, more of contractual workers. They are working on a specific contract with a particular company. If I am that organized sector, if I hire formal sector workers, you must understand my cost will increase, right? Because I need to provide for their social security benefits like provident fund and pension. But if I hire informal workers, no provident fund, no pension, which means the cost of hiring informal workers is lower as compared to cost of hiring formal workers. That is why there is growing informalization of organized sector, with the share of informal workers has increased to more than half, 51%. And lastly, we are creating jobs in the gig economy. But you must understand, those jobs that we are creating in gig economy, they are not formal sector jobs, right? They are informal sector jobs once again. Think of people who are working as delivery partners for Zomato, Swiggy, Zepto, and so on. They are informal workers. They are not formal workers, right? These people, they do not have access to minimum wages. They do not have access to social security benefits. So that is one of the biggest problem with respect to gig economy. Let's look at the next part. Rising unemployment among the educated youths. What is this relationship? Let's understand ideally what should be the relationship between education and employment. Let's say there are two people. One person is uneducated, other person is educated. The person who is uneducated is not literate. He does not has the skill set. So obviously for him, it is quite difficult to get a job. So ideally, unemployment among the uneducated youths should be higher, right? On the other hand, if someone is educated, they are literate, they have the necessary skill set, and they should be able to find jobs easily. So, as far as educated people is concerned, for educated people, unemployment ideally should be lower. But let's see what is happening in India. As far as India is concerned, it is being said that the relationship between employment and education is inverted U. What is this inverted U? Basically, it says that as education status increases, as the education status increases, employment will increase. Obviously, if people are educated, people are literate, people are skilled, so they will get jobs. So as the education increases, the employment also increases. But then it increases up to a certain level. Beyond a particular level, with increase in education, can you see what is happening to employment? Employment is falling, it is reducing. Question is why? The reason is very simple. Think of a person who is extremely well qualified, a person who may have completed his MBA, a person who has completed his MTech, a person who has completed his PhD. These are people who are extremely educated. You must understand, these people do not compromise when it comes to the quality of jobs. They are not ready to work for whichever job which they get. And more importantly, they are not ready to work at lower wages. So these people keep on searching for a job which is according to their requirements. So they keep on waiting. That is why the unemployment rate among the educated youths is very high. That is one problem. More importantly, it is being said our economy is not being able to create enough number of jobs for these highly qualified people. That is why unemployment rate among the educated youths is more. On the other hand, think of this side. A person has completed his class 10th. A person has completed his class 12th. You know what will this person do? He is ready to take up any job which he gets. And more importantly, this person is ready to work even at lower wages also. That is why the employment among those people is high, and unemployment among these highly qualified people is also high. That is how you need to know the relationship. Inverted U. I hope it is clear, everyone. So in particular, if I could show you the data, please look at the data here. 65% of the unemployed people in India are actually educated youths. 65% of uneducated people are, the unemployed people are educated. Similarly, unemployment rate among graduates is 9 times higher than uneducated people. So it is more likely that the graduates are more unemployed. Now coming to the last part, impact of COVID-19 on the labor market. Let's understand this part. Like I said, COVID-19 was a major watershed, right? Whatever achievements we had prior to COVID-19, those achievements or progress have been lost because of COVID-19. In what way? Let's understand here. Let's start with agriculture. When you look at the share of people employed in agriculture, 1 decade back, it was 60%. From 60%, it got reduced to 42% just before the year of COVID, 42%. Can I say it's a good development? It's a good development because the dependence of the people on agriculture reduced. The disguised unemployment also reduced. This is a good development which happened prior to COVID. But then what happened? After COVID, a lot of migrants in the urban areas, when they lost their livelihood, they migrated back to rural areas. And you know what? In rural areas, they took up agriculture once again. That is why the share of employment in agriculture, which had got reduced to 42%, after COVID, from 42, it has increased to 45. Can you see this reversal, right? And this has happened because of what? COVID. This is the first reversal that you can talk about. The second thing is with respect to industry or with respect to manufacturing. Like I said, prior to COVID, after agriculture, it was a manufacturing sector which used to account for the largest share of employment. This was before COVID. What happened? During COVID, lockdown was imposed. All the manufacturing enterprises were closed. There was so much of uncertainty. So what happened is people who are working in the manufacturing sector, they became jobless. And these people who became jobless, they shifted from manufacturing to construction. That is why construction sector has now overtaken the manufacturing sector in terms of being the second largest employer in India. Once again, a reversal, right? Now, why is it a problem? It's a problem because if someone is employed in manufacturing industry, it is more likely that that person is employed as a formal sector worker. If this person has shifted from manufacturing to construction, it means there has been transition from formal sector to informal sector. Once again, a reversal. So can you see 3 major reversals which we have witnessed because of COVID? Share of agriculture has increased, share of manufacturing has reduced, and share of informal workers has increased. 3 major reversals. What are the other changes? Let's see. The fourth one is labor force participation rate. Now, this is very interesting. In fact, it has become a bone of contention as well. See, the government believes that increase in labor force participation rate is good because more number of people are working or looking out for work. This is what the government says. But you know what ILO says? ILO says increase in labor force participation rate might seem good when you see it, but you must understand why are people working or looking out for work. This is a question which ILO raises. Look at COVID-19. Can I say because of COVID-19 there was disruption to livelihood? Because of that disruption to livelihood, people who earlier could afford not to work, these people have now been forced to work in order to supplement the family income. So what ILO believes is we need to look at the underlying reason as to why the labor force participation rate has increased. And the underlying reason is that there is loss of livelihood, there is fall in income, which has led to increase in the labor force participation rate, and in particular, increase in female labor force participation rate. And no wonder when I say that female labor force participation rate has increased, ILO has pointed out that more number of females are now working as unpaid helpers in the household enterprise, which clearly shows that women are being forced to work now because the family's income has got reduced after COVID. I hope you're getting this point, right? So there are a number of things which ILO has pointed out. You can see increase in LFPR indicates that more people are either working or looking out for work to supplement family income. Same can be said about increase in female labor force participation rate. Look at unemployment. Unemployment has got reduced. And what ILO believes that this indicates that more number of people who earlier did not work because the wages were less, they could afford not to work. Now these people are coming forward and working even at low wages because of decline in the income level of the households. And the other three things I've already explained: shift of workers from services to agriculture, change in sectoral share of employment, and reversal of workers. So this is what you need to know as far as the employment scenario in India is concerned. So let's look at the mains practice question. Look at this question. The question is, provide an overview of employment trends and patterns in India's labor market, and also discuss how COVID-19 has impacted the labor market. So obviously, in the body of the answer, there should be two dimensions for sure. The first dimension is employment trends and patterns in the Indian economy. And the second dimension is how COVID has impacted these employment trends and patterns. So this will be the body of the answer. What can be the intro here? If you could say intro, in the intro you can set the context by highlighting the ILO's report, that is India Employment Report 2024. You need to set the context. In what way can you set the context? Let's see here. You can see the intro. Highlight the recent context of India Employment Report, which is, you can write that ILO's India Employment Report has highlighted that COVID-19 has acted as major watershed in India's labor market in the 21st century. The COVID-19 has reversed some of the positive developments witnessed prior to COVID. So because in the body of the answer, you're mentioning about how COVID-19 has adversely impacted our labor market, the conclusion could be, what should we do to reverse these negative trends, right? So The conclusion is need to reverse these negative trends, and you can see the COVID-19, the crisis caused due to COVID-19 should be seen as an opportunity. We need to see this as an opportunity, and that is what the government has repeatedly kept emphasizing. COVID-19 is a opportunity for us to bring long pending reforms. So we need to see this as an opportunity to address the problems, and the government should focus on enhancing employment elasticity and shift workers from low wage, low productivity, informal sector to high wage, high productivity, formal sector jobs. That can be your conclusion. I hope everyone is clear with this concept, right? So, having understood the employment trends, let's look at the next one. The next one is about the jobless growth of the Indian economy. So here, I told you that India needs to create 20 million jobs every year, but we are creating only 4 million jobs. Employment elasticity in India is just 0.1. So we are facing that jobless growth. So to address this jobless growth, the budget 2024 has launched a new scheme called as employment linked incentive scheme. This becomes quite important. So we will discuss what is this employment linked incentive scheme. Apart from that, the economic survey, like I said, has identified two sectors as sunrise sectors for employment creation. Until now, economic survey used to say textile and leather. Now from textile and leather, it is slowly shifted to food processing industry and care economy. So these two have huge potential in creating high wage, high productivity, formal sector jobs. And then, like I have told you already, repeatedly in previous year mains, questions have been asked with respect to jobless growth, right? So you can see the mains practice question. One question here: give a reasoned account for paradoxical relationship between GDP growth and employment elasticity. That is, why are we facing jobless growth? The reasons for jobless growth. Also outline broad strategies to be adopted to create more jobs to reap demographic dividend strategies. Next one. Okay, now this is something which is interesting. This year's economic survey has pointed out that a number of rules, regulations for the welfare of labor, they are actually going against the interest of the workers. So it has identified that these are the problems in the labor rules and regulations, and it is adversely affecting the labor welfare. This is something which becomes important for the upcoming mains. Based upon that, look at the practice question here. Although designed to safeguard interest of employees, labor regulations in India unintentionally restrict the job creation. Critically analyze the structural transformation in rural India. How do you think that food processing industry can act as a promising sector? Okay, so these are some of the practice questions. Next part, in this particular slide, what I have done, I have incorporated everything that you need to know with respect to jobless growth, which is what is the extent of jobless growth, why India is facing jobless growth, what are the implications of jobless growth, and what needs to be done to create more jobs. So please have a look at all of these points. This is a proper answer structure that you can actually use it. That you can directly use it as a intro, reasons for jobless growth, implications and strategies which is needed. Most of the points, let me tell you, they are self-explanatory. Please go through these particular points and try to incorporate these into your answers when a question is asked with respect to jobless growth. Because of the time constraint, obviously I'll not be able to discuss the entire topic of jobless growth, but some of you have attended my mains revision classes. You would know that we have covered this topic in much greater detail in the mains revision classes. So there is no use repeating it. For other students, the content is ready. Please go to this particular content. Because in this particular chapter, there are far more important topics which I would want to cover. That's the reason I'm just sharing the PPT. Please go to this. Okay, let's look at the topic here. Rebalancing labor regulations to promote employment. To explain this particular topic, let me give you a simple analogy. Let's say there's a particular parent. This parent is overprotective of the kids because the parent is concerned that the kid might get spoiled. So the parent is overprotective. You must understand, in this particular case, the intention of the parent is very good. The intention is to ensure that the kid does not get spoiled. But the problem is it will have an adverse impact on the healthy growth of the kid. The kid will become always dependent on the parent. The kid does not get exposed to the challenges of the external world. He will not be able to take up challenges when he goes on to become an adult. Please understand that. So the intention of the parent is very good. We're not questioning the intention, but the outcome is bad. The reason why I'm giving this particular analogy is the government is like that parent and the kid is like labor for India. Government has become very much overprotective of labor in India. So the government wants that labor should not be exploited by the employees, by the employers. Government wants that the laborers should get good wages. So government has laid on a lot of rules, regulations to promote labor welfare. Government intention is good. We are not questioning the intention. But the problem is these rules, regulations made by the government is actually going against the interest of the labor welfare itself. More importantly, it is hindering job creation. In what way? Let's get into this discussion one by one. Where I will tell you some provisions of the labor rules and regulations and how these provisions are creating problems. But before that, basic things. Basic things that you need to know is labor as a subject is placed under the concurrent list. I hope from the perspective of polity, when a subject is placed in the concurrent list, both center and state can make laws. So right now, we have multiple laws made by the state government dealing with labor welfare. As far as central government is concerned, we used to have totally 29 central laws before. We have consolidated, amalgamated all of these 29 central laws into 4 labor codes. Some of these labor codes include Code on Wages, Code on Social Security, Code on Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions. And the 4th one is Code on Industrial Relations. So there are 4 labor codes. So center on its part has already done that amalgamation, simplification of labor laws. The problem is that simplification has not been done yet by the state governments. This is the most basic thing you need to understand. Keeping this basic, let's get into the discussion. Okay, let me tell you here that the way we treat manufacturing sector and the way we treat services sector in terms of labor rules regulations is different. Manufacturing sector as such gets covered under the labor codes, and under this labor codes what we have said is both center and state, they can frame rules and regulations. These rules and regulations can be laid down with respect to number of working hours in a day, number of working hours in a particular week, and so on. All of those rules and regulations can be laid down, about which we will be covering. As far as the services sector is concerned, including the IT services, they are covered under Shops and Commercial Establishment Act. And this particular act, that is Shop and Commercial Establishment Act, it is a law of the concerned state government. It is being said, in case of India, the labor laws under Shops and Commercial Establishment Act, they are more flexible, they are more lenient as compared to the labor laws for the manufacturing sector. If I could highlight one or two important things, let's talk about women employment. In manufacturing sector, you know, most of the state government has put a restriction. They have put a restriction that women can be employed only after 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Women can be employed only for this particular time duration, which means women cannot be employed during the night time. Intention is good to ensure the safety of women. Intention is good, but look at the negative outcome. Negative outcome is it is hindering the job creation for females. I hope you're getting this point. That is the kind of restriction that we have in manufacturing. Think of services. You must have seen a lot of women are working in IT sector. In fact, they work in BPO sector. Do we have such kind of restrictions in IT or BPO? Absolutely not. Because you have seen a lot of women working in night shift also in IT and BPO. So in a way, the way we treat manufacturing and services is completely different. If I am an entrepreneur, I need to choose whether to start a industry, that is manufacturing industry, or a service-based enterprise. I would invariably choose service-based enterprise or manufacturing because the labor laws are flexible there. And you know what has happened? The share of services sector has ballooned to 55% of GDP, whereas share of manufacturing sector has remained stagnant at 14 to 17% of GDP. So one of the biggest reason why India has failed to capitalize on manufacturing is the restrictive labor laws. Is that clear? Let me give you another example. I'm a foreign company based in China. I need to shift from China and I'm looking out for different options. For me, the option is India and Vietnam. In India, I look at the labor laws. Labor laws are very restrictive, especially in manufacturing sector. I look at the labor laws in Vietnam. There, they are very flexible. So, I would any day choose to go to Vietnam rather than come to India. Getting this point? In fact, it is being said, if you go back to 2010, in 2010, the share of manufacturing sector to GDP for India and Vietnam was same. India and Vietnam were same in the year 2010. But now, the share of manufacturing sector in Vietnam has increased to 24%, whereas for India, it has remained at the stage where it was in 2010. I'm not talking about China. Forget China. I'm talking about Vietnam. And Vietnam is actually a small economy. Don't you think India is losing out with a smaller economy like Vietnam because of the labor laws? I hope you're getting this point. So, whatever I have explained, please have a look at this. Differential treatment of manufacturing and services. The industries are covered under the strict labor codes, whereas services sector is predominantly covered under the more lenient State Specific Shop and Commercial Establishment Act. So the problem which it has led to underdeveloped manufacturing sector. And look at this, it has discouraged foreign investment in manufacturing. I have already told you the data. 2010 share of manufacturing sector to GDP was same for India and Vietnam, but today it has increased to 24% in Vietnam, whereas for India it has remained the same. Clear with this? Now let's get into these restrictive laws, restrictive rules and regulations one by one. Let's start with number of working hours. See, we have an act, the code in India, which is Code on Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions. So Code on Occupational Safety, Health and Working Condition, this is a code. Under this particular code, like I said, both central government and state government, they can make rules with respect to what should be the maximum number of working hours for the workers, both center and state. So obviously when state government make rules, the working hours in one state might differ from another state. But on an average, the maximum working hours for the workers in India, maximum working hours in a single day, we have laid it down to be 10.5 hours. In comparison, in Bangladesh, the per day maximum number of working hours is 11. In Vietnam, it is 12. And look at China. China does not impose any limit. China says to workers, it's up to you. How many number of hours you want to work, you work. That is what China does. So in India, government is protective. Government wants that people should not work more, exert themselves, because then it will create health problems, which is a good intention. But the problem in this is you are restricting the number of working hours, and the working hours in India is lower as compared to other countries. Can you tell me what is the problem with respect to this lower working hours? Anyone? Let me know in the chat box. What problems will it create? What are the problems? Think what problems will it create if the working hours is lower? They would need no more workers. Okay. Think other way. Okay, good Garvit. Output will be less. Very good Garvit. Output will reduce obviously. Then और क्या होगा? Think logically. I would want to work for 12 hours in a day, but you are restricting me from working from 12 hours in a day. Good Sakshi. Productivity of the worker will be less. Obviously, productivity will be less. I would want to work more, contribute more to the company, but I'm not allowed to do so, right? So you can see low productivity of the workers. See, whatever, if I'm producing 10 goods in 10.5 hours, if I'm allowed to work for 12 hours, I can produce 12 goods, right? So I can produce more output. Productivity of the worker will increase. Second, if I'm allowed to work for more number of hours, my earning would increase, right? I would be able to earn more, which is good for me. Higher poverty among the workers because they will not be able to earn more. I hope you're getting this point, right? Let's look at the next restriction. The next restriction is in terms of wage payments. Let me touch upon this. What is this wage payment? We have said in one single day, maximum number of hours which a worker can work is 10.5 on an average. What if a worker is working for more than 10.5 in a single day? Imagine if the employer is forcing the worker to work for more than 10.5 hours in a single day, it will obviously be leading to exploitation of the worker, right? So to prevent that exploitation, the government has said if anyone is working overtime, for that overtime work, they need to pay wages, extra wages, which is good. Intention is good once again. But look at the problem it is creating. The overtime wages which the employer is required to pay to the workers is almost double or twice the normal wages. For normal 10.5 hours in a day, I as an employer, might be required to pay rupees 100 per day, but for overtime, I would be required to pay rupees 200 per day. Obviously, what will happen to my cost of production? Cost of production would increase because I am required to pay more overtime wages. Look at the overtime wages in other countries. China and Vietnam, it is just half of the normal wages. In India, it is almost twice the normal wages, double, which is obviously, a problem. So think if I'm an entrepreneur, if I am required to pay double the normal wages for overtime payment, what I will do? I will think, why should I hire more labor? Instead of hiring labor, it's good if I buy more machineries. I hope you're getting this point. So what they will do is the entrepreneurs, rather than focusing on labor intensive industries, they'll focus more on capital intensive industries. They'll shift towards more technology, right? Which in a way hinders job creation, which goes against the interest of the workers, right? So you can see the problem which it is creating is it will encourage capital intensive manufacturing. Second, if I am required to pay overtime wages, which is almost double the normal wages, I'll simply decide not to hire workers on an overtime basis because my cost would increase. And by doing so, what will happen to production? Production will reduce. Getting this point? Decreases the profit of industries because they have to spend more on this. Garvit, what you're saying is true, but you must understand this is what economic survey says. Whatever you're saying, that we can have safeguards for that to ensure that the exploitation of the workers does not take place, right? So when you're writing UPSC mains answer, you have to keep your line of thinking along these lines. Look at the next one, restriction on women employment. In order to ensure the safety of women, earlier what used to say is women cannot be employed before 6 a.m. and after 7 p.m. This was before in the central laws that we used to have. And like I said, all of those central laws, we have brought it under 4 labor codes. Under these labor codes, now the state governments have a provision to allow women to work in night shifts. But you know what has happened? Most of the state governments have gone back to the previous provision once again, which is that women should work only between 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Recently, Karnataka government has removed this restriction on working time for women. Only few states have removed this kind of restriction. This restriction is there in mostly all other states. Nextly, in order to ensure safety of women, to ensure that women's health is not adversely affected, the government has restricted women employment in certain activities which can be hazardous to the women. These activities include petroleum generation, manufacturing of pesticide, manufacturing of glass, and so on. Intention is good, but look at the outcome. Outcome is that we are not being able to create enough number of jobs for women. So think of IT or BPO. In BPO, state governments have allowed the women to work in night shifts. But then the state government have laid on rules and regulations to ensure the safety of women. For example, the state governments have said that women should be provided for transportation facilities in the night time. There should be a security guard in the office to ensure that the women are safe. Don't you think if you can have that kind of regulations to ensure safety of women in the IT industry, the same safety regulations can be made enabled in the manufacturing industry so that the women can work in the night shift also. I hope you're getting this, right? So here it is leading to low female labor force participation rate. And think of it, an entrepreneur, if he hires a female worker, with respect to female workers, he faces a number of restrictions in terms of working time, where the female workers can work. So what will the entrepreneur do? Entrepreneur will pay less wages to females as compared to males. The gender gap in India is much higher. So it is being said, females earn only 18% of labor income as compared to 82% of labor income. Can you see the wide disparity, right? And the last one, restriction on utilization of floor space. What is this restriction? Okay, what happens is when you set up a industry, you acquire a land. After acquiring the land, you build the floor space or the shop floor where actual production of goods takes place. In order to ensure that the shop floor is not too overcrowded, in order to ensure that workers have adequate space for themselves to work, government lays down rules and regulation as to how much should be the floor space per worker. In India, that floor space per worker should be 3.38 square meter. For one worker, you should have 3.38 square meter. It is being said that this floor space per worker is a good rules and regulation to ensure that the worker has adequate space to work upon. No questions asked. But the problem here is the floor space which you have kept for per worker, that is actually higher as compared to other countries. In other countries, the floor space per worker is less, which means if floor space per worker is less on the shop floor, the companies in other countries can hire more workers as compared to India. So this restriction is hindering job creation once again. So higher floor space per worker as compared to other countries. Same way, if you set up an industry, you need to submit the building plan to the government. In this building plan, you are required to reserve some space for activities other than manufacturing. What activities other than manufacturing? For example, canteen facilities, restrooms, etc. I'm not saying that this should not be there. It should be there. But the problem is the government requires the industries to reserve more space for these activities. So think, I'm an entrepreneur, I have acquired land for manufacturing. Now the problem is a vast amount of land is reserved for restroom, a vast amount of land is reserved for canteen facilities, which would mean I would have less amount of space for the actual manufacturing, right? Same way, if there are restrictions with respect to the floor space per worker, which is high, it is restricting me from employing more number of people, hindering the job creation. Did you get this point, everyone? So, the problem which it is leading to is inefficient utilization of land due to higher floor space per worker, and it is hindering the job creation. Economic survey says that if we adopt the floor space per worker which is adopted in Malaysia, if you adopt the Malaysia's standard, then a Indian factory with 1000 square meter of floor space can employ 82 more workers simply by reducing the floor space per worker. So these are the things that you need to know with respect to labor regulations in India. I hope it is clear, everyone. So the economic survey goes on to say that some of these rules and regulations, they have to be made more flexible. We have to make it more lenient to foster the job creation and promote the welfare of the labor. This is what the economic survey goes on to say. And I have already told you in what way questions can be asked in the mains with respect to this particular topic of labor rules and regulations. Let's move to the next topic now. Okay. Now I'm going to discuss the topic of employment linked incentive scheme. Like I said, in this year's budget, the finance minister has announced the employment linked incentive scheme. And let me tell you, there's not one scheme. There are 3 employment linked incentive scheme. One employment linked incentive scheme is for hiring freshers in the formal sector. Another scheme is for hiring of workers in the manufacturing industry. Another scheme is for hiring both freshers as well as existing formal sector workers in the non-manufacturing industries. So there are 3 employment linked incentive scheme. And these schemes are little complicated. So because it is little complicated, I have tried to simplify it through a flow chart. So let's understand the employment linked incentive scheme through a flow chart. Let's say there is a particular company. This company could be a manufacturing company, or it could be a service based company. It could be any company, doesn't really matter. If this particular company hires new formal sector workers, I've already told you what is formal sector. They have job security, income security, and social security benefits, right? So I told you that India not only needs to create more jobs, we need to ensure that these jobs are high wage, high productivity, formal sector jobs. So to ensure that we create more number of jobs and to ensure good quality of jobs, we have this particular scheme under which this company, if it hires new formal sector workers, it will get some incentives. What incentive? Let's understand here. Scheme A is employment linked incentive scheme for the freshers. To understand the scheme, you need to understand why. Why do we even have this scheme? Then you'll understand the design. Let's say there is a particular company. This company hires fresher. You must understand, when the company hires fresher, the fresher does not become productive right from day one. Fresher will probably take some time to get skilled, to get trained, to get accustomed to the company's culture, and probably only after 1 to 1.5 months the fresher might actually become productive and start contributing to the company, right? So that is why, what companies do. They think, why should I hire freshers? Let me hire a already existing worker. So freshers jobs are not getting created because of this reluctance of the companies to hire freshers. So for the companies, there is always a initial cost which they have to incur until the freshers become productive. Which means here the fresher will start contributing to the economy only after 1 to 1.5 months. Which means for first 1 to 1.5 month, the company would have to simply pay salary, but the fresher is not productive. Getting this point? So that is why the company might not prefer to hire freshers. So to solve this particular problem, we have scheme A, which is employment linked incentive scheme for the freshers. What's the design of this scheme? Let's understand. Like I said, it is applicable to all the companies, all the sectors. It is applicable if this fresher is earning a salary of less than 1 lakh per month. What is the benefit, incentive to the company? The incentive which the company gets is 1 month's salary would be paid to the company. So if there's a fresher who is hired by a particular company, 1 month's salary need not be paid by the company. 1 month's salary will be paid by the government, subject to a maximum limit of 15,000. Which means if the company hires a fresher with a salary of 30,000, government will give a salary of 15,000 and the company will give the remaining salary of 15,000. Don't you think it is good for the company, because the company's initial cost of hiring the fresher has got reduced, and this encourages the companies to hire more freshers? Getting this point? This is what is employment linked incentive scheme. Like I said, this scheme is applicable to all companies, does not matter whether it is manufacturing or services. Let's move to the next one. If this company that I'm talking to you about, if it is a manufacturing company, in addition to the incentive that it is getting here, in addition to this incentive, manufacturing company will get the another incentive. What is that incentive? Let me just explain to this. But to understand, you need to have some background information about the social security scheme. So please pay attention. You have employee and employer. So like I said, employee has access to social security schemes such as EPF, Employee Provident Fund, and employee also has access to EPS, Employee Pension Scheme. What actually happens is, to EPF, Employee Provident Fund, both the employee and employer, they'll make contribution. For example, 12% of the salary of the employee is made as a contribution to EPF. So if my salary is rupees 1 lakh, 12,000 rupees I would make as a contribution to EPF. So what will be my take home salary? 1 lakh minus 12 lakh, which is 88,000. That will be my take home salary. As far as employer is concerned, employer will also make 12% contribution. Out of this 12% contribution, 3.67% contribution employer would make to EPF, Employee Provident Fund, and remaining 8.63 he would make it to Employee Pension Scheme. Can you see, an employer is also making 12%, but he is making it to both EPF as well as EPS. So EPF is funded by employee and employer. EPS is funded by the employer alone. That is what you need to know. So think, if there is a manufacturing enterprise. In a manufacturing enterprise, if a person is getting hired as a formal sector worker in a manufacturing enterprise, as a formal sector worker, the employee needs to contribute this 12% of his salary to EPF. The employer also needs to contribute 12% of the salary to EPF and EPS, which means, सबसे पहले, for the employer, the cost of hiring formal sector workers would increase. Just imagine, if the cost of hiring formal sector workers for employers increases, employers, rather than hiring formal sector workers, they'll rather hire informal sector workers. So don't you think this cost should reduce for the employer? Getting it? Same way, if this employee is contributing 12% of his salary to EPF, his take home salary would reduce, right? This in turn will discourage the employee also. So when it comes to the next scheme, that is scheme B. Scheme B is employment linked incentive scheme for job creation in the manufacturing sector. In this particular case, this is applicable to companies hiring formal sector workers above a certain threshold level. Government has fixed a threshold level. Above this particular threshold level, if formal sector workers are employed, then they'll get the benefit. Employees should earn less than 1 lakh. Look at the nature of incentive. Here, what is happening is government is paying certain percentage of salary as an incentive equally to the employee and employer for next how many years? For next 4 years. Compare and contrast this with PLI, production linked incentive scheme, where we are giving incentives to industries for increasing the production. Same way, here we are giving incentive to both employee and employer if they are getting hired in the formal sector. And how much is that incentive? For the first 2 years, 24% in the first 2 years. So this 24% which the government is going to pay as an incentive, this is to be shared equally between the employee and employer, which means this will be 12% and this will be 12%. My question to you is, why is it 12 and 12? वहाँ पे देखो, what is the contribution of employee? The contribution of employee to EPF is 12%. The contribution of employer to EPF and EPS is how much? 12%. So whatever is the contribution which they are required to make to the social security schemes, that contribution, at least for first 2 years, is paid by the government. What's the benefit for me? The benefit for me here is, I earn 1 lakh, I'm giving 12,000 rupees to EPF, and after I give 12,000 to EPF, government will transfer me 12,000 rupees. So what will be my take home salary? My take home salary will come back to 1 lakh. Getting this point? Right? So that is what is the scheme B, employment linked incentive scheme for job creation in the manufacturing sector. For first 2 years, 24%. Third year, it gets reduced to 16%. Fourth year, it becomes 8%. So this is scheme B. Same way, you have the next scheme. The next scheme is applicable if a industry or a company hires new or existing formal sector workers. But this scheme is for non-manufacturing companies. Because for manufacturing companies already we are giving a benefit. The benefit here is this benefit. So the scheme B benefits is limited only to manufacturing. For all other companies you have this scheme, scheme C. What is that benefit? Let's see. You can see government in this particular case reimburses the EPFO contribution by the employer subject to a cap of rupees 3,000 per month. Like I said, employer is making contribution to EPF, right? So whatever contribution the employer is making to EPF, that contribution is reimbursed by the government in case the company happens to be the non-manufacturing company. But it's not that the government is going to reimburse the entire amount. There's a limit, there's a cap, and that cap is 3,000 rupees per month. Like I said, it is not applicable to employees who are covered in part B. So there's a little bit of confusion, which scheme is applicable to which particular company, right? So to simplify this, I have incorporated this particular table diagram. सबसे पहले ये देखो, scheme A alone is applicable for all the companies. All companies, whether they are manufacturing, services, all the companies, if they hire freshers, they'll get the benefit. If a company is manufacturing company, it can get benefit of both scheme A as well as scheme B, if it is a manufacturing company. If it is a non-manufacturing company, for a non-manufacturing company, the benefit would be scheme A plus scheme C, this and this. Which combination is not possible? Scheme B and scheme C. A company cannot get the benefit of scheme B and scheme C simultaneously. So it could be scheme A alone, or scheme A plus scheme B, or scheme A plus scheme C. It can never be scheme B plus scheme C. I hope this part is clear, everyone. So this is the employment linked incentive scheme. So please remember all of these details. Okay. Coming to the next one. Economic survey has highlighted number of initiatives taken by the government to boost the job creation and labor welfare, which obviously becomes important as far as your prelims is concerned. One of the scheme which economic survey makes a mention is Mudra scheme. So let's understand about the Mudra Yojana. Under Mudra, we are providing loans of up to rupees 10 lakh to non-corporate small business sector. So when we say non-corporate small business sector, we are essentially referring to micro units, small scale enterprises. So loans are provided up to rupees 10 lakh. It is implemented by Ministry of Finance. Who can give loans? Look at the category of banks. Almost all categories of banks, including microfinance institutions and NBFCs, can give loans to the micro units. What is the benefit which the bank would get if they give loans to the micro units? If they give loans to micro units, banks get a benefit of the refinancing. So what is refinancing? Think there is this ICICI Bank. This ICICI Bank decides to give 10 lakh rupees loan to a MSME, micro, small and medium enterprise. As soon as ICICI gives 10 lakh loan to this MSME, what actually happens, this 10 lakh rupees loan or money would be given by Mudra to ICICI. This feature is called as refinancing. I as a bank has given loan. I have given loan to micro unit. Whatever loan amount I have given, that loan amount is given to me by the Mudra. Now the thing here is this loan will remain on my balance sheet. It is my responsibility to ensure that the loan does not become NPA. I need to recover this particular loan and then repay the loan to Mudra. I hope you understood this. But why is Mudra giving this kind of refinancing to me? Think, I have given 10 lakh to MSME. As soon as I give 10 lakh, Mudra will give me additional 10 lakh. Using this 10 lakh, you must understand, ICICI Bank can give a new loan to another MSME. So the loans are being circulated. That is why refinancing is a very strong way to promote financial inclusion, particularly among the MSME sector. So this is what is refinancing. So understand, Mudra does not directly lend loans to individuals or micro enterprises. It is mainly a refinancing institution. Next, there is no need for collateral. Both individuals and companies can borrow money. There are three types of loans: Shishu, Kishore and Tarun. Shishu loans up to rupees 50,000, Kishore loans 50,000 to 5 lakh, Tarun loans from 5 lakh to 10 lakh. Now look at the next part. All of you know about Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, right? PM Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana accounts. Under Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana accounts, people who have such account, they get a feature which is called as overdraft. Overdraft means even when the balance in your Jan Dhan account is equal to 0, you could still withdraw some amount of money. And right now, you could withdraw up to rupees 10,000. So this feature where your balance is equal to 0 and yet you could withdraw money, this feature we call it as overdraft feature. So this withdrawal facility which bank is giving to you when your balance is equal to 0, this withdrawal facility is like a instant loan which you get, instant credit that you get, right? So as per the rules and guidelines, please look at this. Overdraft of up to rupees 5,000 availed on Jan Dhan account is also categorized as Mudra loans. So this is very important, where there is a kind of synergy between Jan Dhan and Mudra. So this is one important aspect. Rate of interest on Mudra loans is market determined. They are deregulated. No one is fixing the interest rates. So there is no hard and fast rule that compulsorily the companies or micro units should get loans at a less rate of interest. So please look at the question asked in Prelims 2016. Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana is aimed at, obviously the answer is bringing the small entrepreneurs into formal financial system. Look at this practice question and let me know the answer, all of you. Under this scheme, Mudra provides loans directly to small scale enterprises in India. Yes, Garvit. Does it give loans directly? Obviously not. It is a refinancing agency. Interest rate is fixed by the Ministry of Finance. No, interest rates are deregulated. The Mudra loans are given without collateral. Yes. So the right answer is B. I hope everyone is clear with this, right? So this is one important initiative. Let's look at the budget announcement. Limit of Mudra loans. Can you see there are three types of loans: Shishu, Kishore and Tarun. For Tarun, loans are up to rupees 10 lakh. In this year's budget, it has been highlighted that the limit of Mudra loans will be enhanced to rupees 20 lakh from the current 10 lakh. But this increased limit will not be available to all the entrepreneurs. It will be available only to those entrepreneurs who have availed loans in the past and have successfully repaid the previous loans, which means those entrepreneurs who have good credit history. Getting it? Okay, let's look at the next topic. The government of India is implementing two insurance schemes. One is Pradhan Mantri Jivan Jyoti Bima Yojana, Jivan Jyoti Bima Yojana. Other one is Pradhan Mantri Suraksha Bima Yojana. What is this insurance scheme? Let me briefly touch upon this insurance scheme. Pradhan Mantri Jivan Jyoti Bima Yojana, as a name suggests, it is a life insurance scheme. Life insurance scheme means if you are enrolled under this particular scheme and if you die for any reason, you are entitled to get a money of around rupees 2 lakh under Pradhan Mantri Jivan Jyoti Bima Yojana. Death could be because of any reason. Pradhan Mantri Suraksha Bima Yojana, it is a insurance cover for accident. If someone meets with an accident, the person dies or person suffers a permanent disability, for that kind of accidents, there is a insurance scheme, that is Pradhan Mantri Suraksha Bima Yojana. From the perspective of prelims, you need to know the basic differences between these two schemes. Let's take up the differences and then we'll solve some practice questions. Look at this. Pradhan Mantri Suraksha Bima Yojana is an insurance scheme for death or disability due to accident. This is a life insurance scheme. The eligibility to get enrolled in these two schemes is you need to have either a bank account or a post office account. Age group, can you see? Here it is 18 to 70. Here it is 18 to 50. Please remember the age group, because this time there was a question on age group for Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Mandhan, which was asked in Prelims 2024. So it is factual, confusing. That is why I put it in a table. Remember this. Annual premium that you have to pay under this scheme is rupees 12, which gets auto debited from your bank account or post office account. Annual premium for this particular scheme is rupees 330. Benefit that you get is rupees 2 lakh for accidental death and full disability. But if there's a partial disability, the benefit is 1 lakh. Rupees 2 lakh in case of death of the insured person due to any reason, including accident. Including accident, if a person dies, he'll get this benefit also, he'll get this benefit also. Then you can see both these two schemes are implemented by Ministry of Finance. These are some basic details, very factual details that you'll have to mug up and remember. Look at this practice question now. Insurance penetration and insurance density. Okay. When people avail insurance, right? People pay premium for that insurance. They could pay a premium if it is a life insurance or if it is a insurance because of accident. People will pay certain premium. Whatever premium that we pay, that people pay, if we express that premium as percentage of GDP. For example, if GDP is equal to 100 and premium which is paid by all the people put together is 4, then if we express this premium as percentage of GDP, then we call this as insurance penetration. If you express this premium as percentage of population, then we would call this as insurance density. That's the difference. So what is common to insurance penetration and insurance density is numerator. In both the two things, the numerator is premium. But in case of penetration, the denominator is GDP. In density, the denominator is population. So read this here. Insurance penetration is measured as ratio of insurance premium to population. Insurance penetration is not population, it is GDP. It is incorrect. This is also incorrect. Basically, I've interchanged the two. So insurance penetration is measured as ratio of insurance premium to GDP. Insurance density is measured as ratio of insurance premium to population. Right now, if you see the insurance penetration for India, it is only 4% against the global average of 6.8%. Global average is 6.8, whereas in India it is just 4%, which means that we have to increase our insurance penetration, right? Look at this question. Quickly tell me the answer. What do you think is the answer to this question? It provides for insurance coverage on account of accidental death or disability. It is open to all the people in the age group 18 to 40. It is implemented by Ministry of Finance. It provides for insurance coverage on account of accidental death or disability. It is obviously correct. Accidental death or disability. It is open to all the people in the age group 18 to 40. It is 18 to 70. It is implemented by Ministry of Finance. Right. So answer is 1 and 3 only. So just like how, we have discussed these two schemes, there are other schemes related to insurance. You can see this one, it is related to pension, sorry. It is about Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Mandan and Atal Pension Yojana. I have incorporated this in the form of a table so that it becomes easier for you to do a comparison between the two schemes and go through it, right? So please take your time, go through this. After going through this, try to solve these two questions asked in 2024 and 2016, right? Let's move to the next scheme. The next scheme is Unified Pension Scheme. So, I hope everyone must be knowing that just 2 weeks back, the government of India has come up with Unified Pension Scheme for the government employees. So, in the previous year prelims, a question already has been asked with respect to new pension scheme. Same way, you may expect a question related to unified pension scheme. That is what I'm going to cover. But to understand unified pension scheme, you need to understand the features of old pension scheme and new pension scheme. The reason is simple, because the unified pension scheme has combined the best features of old pension scheme and new pension scheme. So because it has combined the best features of these two schemes, let's first look into these two schemes so that you get more clarity with respect to the unified pension scheme. So let's start with old pension scheme for the government employees. Okay, here under old pension scheme, to the pension of the government employees, the contribution was done entirely by the government. The government employees were not required to make any contribution to pension. So once the government used to make contribution to the pension of the government employees, the government employees used to get a minimum assured pension. I repeat, minimum assured pension. That minimum assured pension was 50% of their last drawn salary. So at the time of retirement, let's say if I'm a government employee, if I'm earning 50,000 salary, I will get minimum 25,000 as pension. So government employees were assured of minimum pension. That is why the old pension scheme was called as defined benefit, because the benefit to the government employees was defined, fixed. आपको इतना बिल्कुल मिलेगा. So this old pension scheme was considered to be advantageous for employees. In what way? They used to get minimum assured pension. Upon the death of the government employee, the spouse would be entitled to get the family pension also. Pension was linked to inflation. See, generally, government keeps revising the salaries based upon the recommendations of the pay commission. Whenever the salaries of government employees were revised, even the pension amount used to get revised based upon the inflation. No contribution needed. They are not required to make any kind of contribution. So the old pension scheme was very good from the perspective of the government employees. But the problem with the old pension scheme is that it imposed a disproportionate burden on the government. Why disproportionate burden? Can you see the entire contribution is done by the government? Second, government was giving a minimum pension of 50% of the last drawn salary. Contribution is entirely done by the government, plus government is given a commitment that will get 50% of your last drawn salary's pension. So there was disproportionate burden on the government. So in a way, old pension scheme was more tilted towards employees. It was disadvantageous for the government. To solve this particular problem, we came up with new pension scheme. What happens under the new pension scheme? Let's understand here. Under the new pension scheme, can you see both the government and the government employee, they will make contribution. Under old pension scheme, there is no contribution by government employee, but new pension scheme, there is a contribution by the government employee. And here, this scheme is called as defined contribution scheme. Why defined contribution? Because the contribution by the employee is defined. Government, as you can see, used to contribute 14% of salary. Employees contribute 10% of their salary. So this money, what actually happens is this corpus, it gets invested in pension funds. Just like how you have, mutual fund companies, insurance fund companies, you have pension fund companies in India. So this money was invested in pension fund companies, and these pension fund companies in turn used to invest that money in capital market like shares, bonds, and so on. So the pension which the government employees would get at the end of their retirement, this was not minimum assured pension which they used to get earlier. This pension is now linked to market returns. Think of it. The capital market is doing extremely good, they'll get more returns. If capital market crashes, they'll get less returns. So what happens under the new pension scheme is, upon the time of retirement, 60% of the lump sum amount, the corpus which is generated over a period of time, along with returns, that 60% is given to the employee, government employee. The remaining 40% of the corpus is paid over a period of time. Can you see how this scheme is actually disadvantageous for the employees? Number one, they are required to make contribution, which they are not required to do before. Second, earlier they used to get minimum assured pension, but there's no minimum assured pension. The pension which they're going to get is linked to market rate of returns, right? So this scheme was disadvantageous for the employees because reduction in take home salary, no minimum assured, and pension amount was not linked to inflation. But this scheme was advantageous for the government because government burden reduced. Look at this. Government was able to encourage savings by the government employees, because government employees are saving their salary like 10% of the salary every year. So it will promote more savings in the economy, and it will also boost the capital market. So this was a design of the new pension scheme. But like I said, the new pension scheme was heavily criticized by the government employees simply because the burden increased. So now the government of India has come up with unified pension scheme, which in a way combines the best features of old pension scheme and new pension scheme. In what way? Let's understand. It is still a defined contribution scheme like your new pension scheme, where the government's contribution, which was earlier 14% of salary, now has increased to 18.5% of the salary. Government's contribution has increased. And the employees are still required to contribute 10% of the salary, just as NPS. But under new pension scheme, there was no minimum assured pension. Minimum assured pension was under old pension scheme. So this feature we have incorporated under unified pension scheme, under which what we have said rupees 10,000 per month will be the minimum assured pension for the government employees who have served for minimum 10 years. If I am a government employee, if I have served for less than 10 years, I will not get any insurance under this. I should serve for minimum 10 years to get minimum pension of rupees 10,000. As the number of years of government service increases from 10 years to 25 years, the pension amount would also keep increasing, such that if someone has served for 25 years or more, they will get at least half of their last drawn salary as pension. So you can see 50% of the last drawn salary with experience of 25 years or more. They'll get assured family pension at 60% of the pension received before the death of the employee. Inflation indexation, just like what used to have before under OPS, and no pension for the government employees with less than 10 years of experience. So these are the new developments with respect to unified pension scheme. Hope it is clear. Let's take up the practice question. Okay, look at prelims 2017 new pension scheme. Who among the following can join national pension system? See, national pension system has two variants. One is for government servants and other one is for individuals like you and me who might not be government servants. Even we can enroll under the new pension scheme. And that new pension scheme is applicable to both Indian residents as well as the non-residents. Even NRIs can also enroll under the new pension scheme. So the first one is incorrect. The age of enrollment is not 21 to 55. It has increased to 70 now. So even this is incorrect. All central government employees, including those of armed forces, people working in armed forces are not part of new pension scheme. That is why this statement is incorrect. So the only statement which is correct is the statement C, which says all the state government employees joining the services after the date of notification by the respective state government. Look at MCQ number 8. What do you think on the first statement? Unified pension scheme would replace the new pension scheme from April 1st, 2025. What do you think? Look at the statement, three statements. Okay. सबसे पहले the unified pension scheme is not going to replace the new pension scheme. Understand? So the government employees right now who are already serving in the government, they have been given an option. Either they can continue with new pension scheme or they can shift from new pension scheme to unified pension scheme. So unified pension scheme is an option which is given to government employees in addition to the new pension scheme. So it is not going to replace the new pension scheme completely. That is why the first statement is incorrect. And obviously it will come into effect from April 1st, 2025, but it is not going to replace it. It provides for minimum guaranteed pension of 50% of the loss drawn salary for all the government employees? No. It is only for those government employees who serve for 25 years or more. They'll get half of their last drawn salary. Unified pension scheme provides for contribution by both government and employees. Yes, it does. Government's contribution, like I said, has increased now from 14 to 18.5. So right answer is 3 only. I hope it is clear. Let's move to the next one. Agro processing sector, food processing sector. Okay. So here, like I said, the economic survey this year has identified two sectors as sunrise sectors when it comes to creation of jobs. These two sectors are food processing and care economy. So let's understand about the food processing sector. For that, I made a question. Please have a look at the question. Critically analyze the structural transformation in rural India. How do you think food processing sector can act as a promising sector to address these problems? So what we need to know is what kind of structural transformation is taking place in rural India. And if that structural transformation is problematic, if it is creating problems, how food processing sector can sort these problems? That is what we need to understand. So let's get on with the discussion of this topic. Okay, please have a look at this part. The rural economy constitutes almost 40% of the national income. 40% of national income, that is GDP, is contributed by rural economy. And it is being said that the rural India is undergoing structural transformation. What is that structural transformation? Most of you know the basics, right? Structural transformation means an economy is dominated by agriculture. After the development of agriculture, the manufacturing sector gets developed, and after the manufacturing sector, the services sector gets developed. So rural India is also undergoing that kind of structural transformation. But it is being said there are some flaws or problems in that structural transformation. What are the problems? So what we'll do here is we'll first concentrate on benefits of the structural transformation. What are the good things about the structural transformation? And then we'll look at the problems. The first good thing is the share of workforce employed in agriculture has declined from 40% to from 60% to 45% in the last decade, which is good because it has helped us reduce the disguised unemployment in agriculture. This is a good development. Second, see, rural India can contribute to agriculture, it can contribute to manufacturing, and it can contribute to services, right? So rural India contributes to 95% of agricultural output. It means if you are producing agricultural commodities worth 100, 95 rupees worth agricultural commodities are produced where? In rural India. In urban India, remaining 5 rupees is produced. So the contribution of rural India to agriculture is 95%. Now this is something which is quite surprising. The share of rural India to manufacturing has now increased to 51%. It means if you are producing goods worth rupees 100 in manufacturing sector, 51 rupees worth output is coming from rural areas. Why? The basic idea is, in urban areas, if you want to acquire land, acquisition of land in urban areas is considered to be very time consuming. It is considered to be very costly. It is much cheaper to purchase land in rural areas where the land is cheaper, right? So industries are preferring to set up their bases in rural India as compared to urban India, and that is why the share of rural India to manufacturing has increased. So when you think of rural areas, the first thing that comes to us is rural India is predominantly agrarian. Slowly, that notion of rural India being agrarian is changing because it is shifting towards manufacturing. Can you see that kind of structural transformation which is taking place, right? It is contributing 25% to the service sector output. Contribution of rural India to manufacturing has doubled from 25% in 1970 to 50% in the year 2011-12, and this has been highlighted by Niti Aayog. It's an official report. People in rural India can earn income from farm as well as non-farm. Now, people are earning more income from non-farm sources. The share of non-farm income is higher, that is 70% as compared to farm income. So more number of people in rural areas are earning income from construction, transportation, services such as education, healthcare, and so on, right? So which once again is a good development because people's dependence on agriculture has got reduced. So these are the good things about structural transformation. But there are some problems and challenges. Look at the first problem. The income level of the farmers in India is considered to be too less. Look at our production of agriculture. The production of agriculture has increased, but in spite of increase in production, the income of the farmers has not increased proportionately or commensurately. So that is the biggest problem. The second problem is, remember, I told you about employment elasticity of the Indian economy. Employment elasticity of Indian economy is 0.1, which means 1% increase in GDP leads to 0.1% increase in job creation. That is for entire Indian economy. But if you look at the employment growth rate in the rural areas, that employment growth rate in rural areas is minus 2.8. It is not even positive, it is negative. What is minus 2.8? Minus means rather than creating jobs, jobs are getting destructed in rural areas. Getting that point? That is why the employment growth rate is negative, which obviously means that people are leaving agriculture sector. That is why jobs are getting destructed. But if people are leaving agriculture, ideally these people who are leaving agriculture should be able to find jobs in the manufacturing sector in rural India, because the manufacturing sector is growing. But the problem here is twofold. These people who are living agriculture, they do not have the necessary skill set to get employed in manufacturing sector. Problem number one. Problem number two, these manufacturing enterprises set up in rural India, they are not labor intensive. They are capital intensive, which means they are employing less people and using more technology. So you can see jobless growth or negative employment growth in the rural areas is because of lack of skill set and dominance of capital intensive manufacturing. So what is happening now? People, they are not earning good amount of income in rural areas. They are unable to get jobs in the manufacturing sector in the rural India. So these people are now migrating to urban India now. This is a distress migration. When these people migrate to urban areas, predominantly these people are finding jobs in construction industry, and construction industry is not a formal sector, it is an informal sector. The wages are low, the productivity is less, and ultimately India is failing to reap demographic dividend now. So all of these problems are taking place because of this kind of structural transformation. So it is being said the answer to these problems is a food processing industry. Food processing industry in a large way can address these problems. Can you generate the problem points with respect to how food processing industries can address these problems? Please let me know the bullet points quickly. How food processing industries can address these problems quickly. 2 to 3 bullet points. Generate employment, okay. Others, at least 3 to 4 points. Because rural India produces 95% of agricultural commodities, they can have capital. Good Garvit, good point. Others, Amul cooperation, good Kuldeep, good. Think. Forward linkages, good Sakshi. forward linkages for agriculture commodities. Okay, please pay attention here. How can food processing sector act as promising sector for the rural transformation? Number one is it will help boost the farmers' income. I told you that the farmers' income has remained less. If you boost the food processing industry, we can increase the income of the farmers. How? Food processing industries procure the agricultural commodities directly from the farmers. Because they procure the commodities directly from the farmers, will be able to eliminate the middlemen and intermediaries, and hence enable the farmers to get more income. This is one way, that is backward linkages. What can also happen is if you organize the small and marginal farmers into cooperatives, into farmer producer organizations, these farmers can actually do value addition to the agricultural commodities which they are growing. For example, let's talk about cooperatives, right? If there's a farmers cooperative which is growing grapes, they can actually do a processing of grape into grape juice and get more output, more prices on their output, right? So it will boost the farmers' income through backward linkages as well as forward linkages. In particular, economic survey makes a mention about one famous FPO called as Sayadri Farmer Producer Company. With respect to Sayadri Farmer Producer Company, let me tell you a brief history about it. It has started in the year 2010. It has started with just 11 marginal farmers, small and marginal farmers in the year 2010. From 2010 to until now, from just 11 farmers, now if you look at the net turnover of this Sayadri Farm Producer Company, its turnover has increased to 1000 crores. It has had a phenomenal growth. You know what it is doing? It has organized farmers into cooperatives. Farmers grow different fruits and vegetables like pomegranate, grapes, banana. All of these fruits and vegetables are grown and they are involved in processing of these fruits and vegetables, which gets them more prices. This is how you need to link this. Reduces the demand for MG Narega work, obviously, right? Government is spending huge amount of money on MG Narega. If you are able to shift people to food processing industries, the money spent by government on MG Narega would reduce and people will get shifted to more productive and less fiscally straining activities. Look at the other points. I think they are self-explanatory. Boost value addition in agriculture, benefit the consumers, boost agricultural exports. So this is how food processing sector holds a lot of promise with bringing about transformation in the rural India. So can you see this framework itself is like an answer to the question which I have made. Critically analyze the structural transformation in rural India. So your intro could be this. And because we are talking about critically analyze, you need to write about benefits and challenges. And then in the second part, you can write these points. I hope it is clear. Okay. So this is about the food processing sector. Let's move to the next one. That is care economy. With respect to care economy, the economic survey has a separate section on care economy, and you can look at the section here. It says carrying our way to growth, the necessity and prospects of well developed care economy for India. Why is it important? Simply because Yes. Am I audible now, everyone? Okay. Thank you. Fine. So let's understand the meaning of care economy, the present status of care economy. Okay. Look at the definition of care economy as per ILO, International Labour Organization. According to ILO, care economy consists of activities and relations involved in meeting the physical, psychological, and emotional needs of the people. This is the definition as per ILO. So, if you're writing an answer in the mains examination on care economy, please try to replicate this particular definition of ILO. Okay. Then you can see care economy will include both compensated and unpaid or underpaid work. In simple words, if I have to explain in layman's language, care economy includes all those people who are involved in taking care of others. Basically, it could include homemakers who are taking care of the senior citizens, children, who are involved in household duties like collecting fuel wood or fetching drinking water, doing household duties. So all of that is also care economy, which is unpaid. It also includes underpaid and as well as paid care workers, which include domestic workers, nurses. Even those people are also part of the care economy. If you look at the present status of care economy, economic survey has tried to calculate as to what is the present status of care economy, what is the value of care economy. Economic survey has pointed out that the economic value of women's unpaid domestic and care work is as high as 15 to 17% of GDP. This is probably for the first time we have an estimate of what exactly is the contribution of women in terms of the care economy. 15 to 17%, which is quite humongous. Second, NSO, National Statistical Office, carries out a survey called as Time Use Survey. In this particular survey, NSO tries to find out what proportion of time is spent by males and females on different activities. According to NSO, it has highlighted that women spend almost 8 times more amount of time on care as compared to males. It means in a day, if males spend 1 hour on care work, women spend 8 hours on care work. So the problem with the care economy is there is disproportionately higher burden on the females. Getting it point? So what are the implications if there is a greater burden? Let's try to understand. Negative implications of dominance of women in the care economy. Number one, decrease in female labor force participation rate. Obviously, if women are spending more amount of time in household duties and taking care of children and elderly, they will not be able to contribute in a growth and development of a country. That is why female labor force participation rate, as I said, it is 37% as against 78% for the males. The second problem is time poverty. What is time poverty? Generally, when we think about poverty, the first thing that comes to our mind is income poverty. It is being said women in India not only face income poverty, they also face time poverty. Which means women spend so much time on household duties that they do not get time for themselves. And when they don't get time for themselves, it might lead to problem of mental health problems. They might not be able to contribute in a positive way for the economy. So that is the problem, time poverty. You need to use such kind of keywords in your answers. Motherhood penalty. Now think here, in a company, you have males and females. Generally, we all know that companies discriminate against females in favor of males. That is always there in a company. But let's say within females, there are two females. One female is a mother, and the other female is a younger girl. What happens is the companies have a perception that women who are mothers, for them the priority is the family and not the company. So these mothers, they are generally discriminated against as compared to other employees. So these mothers might face problems in terms of promotions, in terms of opportunities. So that discrimination against mothers in companies, we call them as motherhood penalty. And no wonder it has led to an effect which is called as glass ceiling effect. Glass ceiling effect basically means in a particular company, if you look at the top level management, the top level management is generally dominated by males, and we have very less females in the top level management. That is glass ceiling effect. The status of a member in a family depends upon how much they are contributing in terms of money. Women contribute a lot in terms of taking care of household duties. But the problem is we do not attach a monetary value to the contribution. Because we don't attach a monetary value to the contribution, the status of women in a family is quite less. It perpetuates the gender stereotypes that the care economy should be, the care work should be done only by females. Higher burden during crises such as COVID-19. When you look at the care economy, right, taking care of children, senior citizens, that burden should be on households, on government, as well as a private sector. For example, let's say the private sector can set up creches, right? Creches it can set up so that it can take care of the children. But the disproportionately, the burden of the care work has fallen on households, and on the within the households, it has fallen on the women. And last one, it has hindered economic growth because if the female labor force participation rate is less, we will not be able to tap into gender dividend, not silver dividend, gender dividend. Gender dividend means females. So what are the strategies? Economic survey has given a number of strategies which must be adopted to promote the care economy. Let's understand these strategies one by one. Look at the first one, Sector Skill Council for the care services. What is Sector Skill Council? Under the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, which is for skilling people, we have set up Sector Skill Council. This Sector Skill Council includes the industry representatives. These people will help identify what kind of skill sets we need in a particular sector. For example, for the IT sector, we might have a separate Sector Skill Council. This Sector Skill Council in the IT sector will help us identify what skills we need in the IT sector in the next 10 to 20 years. Same way, Economic Survey has highlighted that if we could have a Sector Skill Council for the IT sector, we need to have a Sector Skill Council for the care services. This Sector Skill Council should help us identify what kind of skill set we need for the skill economy in next 10 to 20 years. That's the first point. Second point is we need to facilitate PPP, public-private partnership, in setting up of old age homes and pre-primary schools, so that the burden on the females gets reduced. For the creches and the elderly homes, we need to have a rating system to ensure their accountability. This is the recommendation of the economic survey. But apart from these points, what I think is the most important point that you have to keep in mind is ILO's 5R framework. ILO's 5R framework means there are 5 R's which we must focus upon in order to empower women and reduce their burden in the care economy. The first R is recognize. Recognize means we have to regularly carry out time use surveys in order to capture, quantify, and value care economy. Think of it. Economic survey has done that, right? It has tried to capture what is the contribution of women to the economy in the care sector, which is like 15 to 17. If you are able to do it on a regular basis, we can identify what is the contribution of the women to the economy. And by identifying that, the status of women in our economy would increase. Next, reduce. We must reduce the burden on the women by making adequate investment in care infrastructure like pre-primary education, health, electricity, drinking water, LPG connection. Let me just give an example with respect to LPG connection. Let's say there's a household. This household does not has a LPG connection. So obviously women in such households would have to spend a substantial amount of time in collecting fuel wood, right? If such an household is provided with LPG connection, the time spent on women on collecting fuel wood will otherwise reduce, and time poverty which women face will reduce, and women can actually get employed in productive sectors. The same thing can be said about drinking water. If households do not have a tapped water connection, women have to walk for long distances to fetch drinking water. You give them the tap water connection, the time spent by the women in the care economy will reduce, leading to more female labor force participation rate, right? So government should invest more amount of money in the care infrastructure. Redistribute. Redistribute means sharing the burden. So we have to support NGOs and private sector to care for the children and elderly. Reward. Provide for a cash transfer to women so that they can purchase child care services from the domestic workers. Economic survey has given an example of a case study of Brazil. So economic survey says in Brazil, the women who are considered to be poor, for the poor women, the government is transferring some amount of money. Using this particular money, the women can hire domestic workers to do the household duties. This has dual benefit. Benefit number one, it will increase the female labor force participation rate. Benefit number two, domestic workers who are otherwise underpaid will get better payment, right? So it is a dual benefit which people might get. Representation of women in the workforce should increase. We can look at all of these points, right? Economic survey has given some case studies of Mexico. You can see Mexico. In Mexico, the government is doing two things. On one hand, it is giving grant to the child care facilities, and it is also giving subsidies to low income earning women. Same like Brazil, but Mexico has gone one step ahead and it is giving grant to child care facilities, which in a way is not only enhancing female labor force participation rate, but it is also creating more jobs for the caregivers. Same way, there is a startup in India. You can very well search for this startup. This is a startup which is funded by Tata. The startup is called as Good Fellows. What this startup does is, this particular startup hires young people and calls these young people as grand pals. These grand pals, what they do, they reach out to the senior citizens who are lonely and who might be searching for companionship. So, to ensure that these senior citizens do not get into depression, do not face any health problems, the startups provide the senior citizens with certain young people who will act like their friends. And in India, for creches, we have come up with a new scheme called as Revamped Palna Scheme. So these are some case studies with respect to care economy. So this is all that you need to know as far as the care economy in India is concerned. So let me just show you here the question which was asked in previous year mains. Distinguish between care economy and monetized economy. How can care economy be brought into monetized economy through women empowerment? So you can look at the intro. Care economy definition includes invisible, unpaid or underpaid activities such as taking care of children, elderly, household work, whereas monetized economy includes exchange of goods and services at market determined rates. Next, because the question is asking distinguish between care economy and monetized economy, this is the table which shows the difference. You can very well go to the table. Next part is how can care economy be brought into monetized economy, right? So here, because you're writing about care economy and you can mention that women have disproportionately higher burden in the care economy, we can write what are the negative implications of dominance of women in the care economy. After that, you can directly use the ILO's 5R framework which we have discussed directly. So this ILO's 5R framework is so strong that this particular framework you can use it in mostly all the answers which deal with women development. Okay. Lastly, as far as conclusion is concerned, you can see the above mentioned strategies can help us meet multiple SDGs like SDG 1, SDG 3, SDG 4, SDG 5 and SDG 6. So you can conclude your answer with sustainable development goals. I hope it is clear, everyone, right? There are few more topics left. For example, there's one topic about skilling India. With respect to skilling India, what I've done, I made a question and there's a mind map on skilling India where I have highlighted with respect to skilling India why we should focus on skilling India, what initiatives the government has taken, what are the challenges with respect to skilling India, as well as the strategies needed. Apart from that, in the next slide, I have incorporated the budget announcement for skilling India. You can go to the two announcements. One is the new centrally sponsored scheme for skilling India, and there's a revamped model skill loan scheme. I've made the PPT as self-explanatory as possible. Please go to that. Can you see? Everything is self-explanatory. I put it like a bullet point. Please go to that. The next one is about the last topic of the day is the economic survey has made a mention about a kind of bond called as skill impact bonds. So to understand skill impact bonds, you need to know what do you mean by impact bonds. So let's discuss what do you mean by impact bonds. Let's look at through a flow chart. See, in case of impact bonds, सबसे पहले, when I say bonds, do not think of these bonds like your government securities or your corporate bonds. Do not link these bonds to government securities or corporate bonds. When I say impact bonds are more like a contractual agreement a contract basically. So let's see how does this contractual agreement works. Let's say there is a private sector entity. It could be any private sector entity. What will this private sector entity do? It will choose a implementation agency. Implementation agency could be some NGO, non-governmental organization. Now the private sector will give some funds to this particular NGO in a form of contractual agreement. In this particular contract, the private sector will lay down some targets which this NGO should be able to meet within a particular time frame. The targets are laid down such that these targets can easily be measured and they can easily be verified. For example, the private sector may give some amount of funds to implementation agency, that is NGO, and say within 1 year you must reduce IMR, that is infant mortality rate. You must reduce MMR. Can I say IMR and MMR is something which is quite possible to measure after 1 or 2 years? So these targets are easily measured as verified. So private sector will give some money to NGO saying that you meet these targets within this particular time frame. Once the time frame is completed, after the end of time frame, what we do, this NGO will spend money on all of this thing, they'll meet the targets and so on. Look at this. Only if the targets are met. NGO has certain targets to meet with respect to IMR, MMR, or for that matter, any other target. Only if targets are met, what will happen is a third party comes into picture. What is that third party? The third party is an outcome funder. This outcome funder will give money to the private sector. Why will it give money to the private sector? Because the private sector has given this money to NGO. Now you must be thinking, benefit क्या है private sector का? Why is it giving money to NGO? Initially itself there's a contract. Initially itself there's a MOU between 3 parties: private sector, NGO, and the outcome funder. 3 parties. So let's say here, the private sector might give 100 rupees to this NGO. In return, the private sector might be giving 120 rupees. So benefit क्या है private sector का? Additional 20 rupees. It's a return for the private sector. The outcome funder can be a government. If the outcome funder is a government, we call it as social impact bonds. What is the benefit for the government? Government, especially in India, spends huge amount of money on education, health, skills. But government might not be able to get good outcomes. Like government spends money on IMR or MMR, but government might not be able to reduce IMR or MMR. Government might spend huge amount of money on education. Government might not be able to improve learning outcomes. But the best benefit here of the impact bonds is government will give money only when the targets are met. So that way it is more target oriented. That way it is more ensuring that we are able to create value for money. Right? Government will spend money only when the targets are met. So outcome funder can be government, which is in that case we will call as social impact bonds. The outcome funder could be a donor NGO or a foundation, like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's a very big foundation. They can act as an outcome funder. If the outcome funder is a foundation, we call it as development impact bonds. The best example of impact bonds is, you can see here, there's a bond called as Utkrisht bond. For this Utkrisht bond, the outcome funder is a donor agency of US called as United States Agency for International Development. It is a donor agency of US. What this particular outcome funder is doing is, this is trying to improve the health outcomes of women in Rajasthan. It has chosen certain districts in Rajasthan and it is trying to improve the IMR, MMR in Rajasthan. Same way, we have another impact bond called as Educate Girls Development Impact Bond, which is funded by another outcome funder called as Children's Investment Fund Foundation. And the NGO which is implementing is called as Educate Girls. Because we are talking about skill impact bonds, the skill impact bonds are launched by National Skill Development Corporation, which means in case of skill impact bonds, the outcome funder is National Skill Development Corporation. So there would be a private sector. The private sector will give some money to implementation agency. The example which I gave you was with respect to social sector, but here we are talking about skills. For providing skill set, the implementation agency would be some training institutes like ITI colleges, polytechnic colleges, and so on. So private sector entity will give some money to training institutes to provide necessary skill set to the workers, the youths. And it can lay down condition that you have to not only provide the skill set, you should also ensure that the people get placed also in companies. Only if people get placed, I'll pay you money. Don't you think it becomes more accountability for this training institute to provide quality skill set and ensure that the people get placed? So when people get placed, who comes into picture? National Skill Development Corporation, and that will give money to private sector. So that way, National Skill Development Corporation is able to ensure value for money. It is not unnecessarily spending money. It is spending money only when the targets are met. So that's the best part about the skill impact bonds. I hope it is clear, everyone. All of these bonds, they have been mentioned in 2023 Sustainable Finance Report published by during G20, right? So this is what you need to know. I hope everyone is clear. So there are one last topic, apprenticeship or internship, which I have incorporated in the PPT. As you can see, this is the mind map on apprenticeship or internship. I hope you should be able to go through this particular mind map, right? So I'm finally done with the theme of employment, skill development, and labor welfare. Tomorrow, once again, there will be a discussion on economic survey where we shall be taking up the topic of banking and finance, that is monetary management and inflation. That will be tomorrow. So tomorrow's class will be taken by Shiva sir. And as far as I'm concerned, I will be probably taking up the next class on Tuesday or Monday. And that will be my last class, where I will be taking up 2 chapters, that is agriculture and infrastructure. So that will be the last in series of the budget and economic survey videos. I hope it is clear, everyone. Okay. Thank you so much. The PPT will be shared. Go to the PPT. Okay. Study well. Thank you so much.